Today I want to start with a really important, if sometimes misunderstood topic, religious freedom. I want to take you back for a moment to describe the landscape in which we find ourselves. Go back to 2018, January, and we saw then that laws on same-sex marriage passed following the postal vote. Now what that means is that Australian law now says that marriage is the union of two persons. It used to say it was the union of a man and a woman, to the exclusion of all others voluntarily entered into. And look, what that actually means is that the law defines what marriage must be. And I use that word must advisedly because laws in our system, in a common law system, are rules of right conduct. There's theorists throughout the centuries that have made that point. They're not sort of nudges in the right direction. They're not helpful suggestions. They're not just voluntary codes. They are the rules. You know, the biblical description of the ministry of a government is to reward good and punish evil, is to really define what is right and what is wrong. And I actually think that governments do that anyway. That's a description of what governments do. They say what is right, they say what is wrong, and the law then enforces that. And so we as Christians have found ourselves in a situation, and indeed many people with different faith backgrounds, where we actually have a set of extremely fundamental beliefs that go to the very core of the creation narrative itself and our understanding of the universe, which are not just different to what the law says, but I think more strictly speaking, which are against the law, which are contrary to the law. Because we believe that marriage is the union of one man, one woman, voluntarily entered into, to the exclusion of all others, for life. And that is not what the law says marriage must be. Now there's beliefs that flow out of that, particularly around the other creation ordinances, beliefs around family, beliefs around gender, beliefs around sexuality, all of which are now in some way contrary to what the law actually says, especially when you add the anti-discrimination frameworks into the mix. It becomes more serious because they are now weaponized against people with differing beliefs, particularly around sexuality, particularly around family, particularly around gender. Now, in other countries, many other Western countries, there are carve-outs in the law which sort of are a nod to the fact that people sometimes have differences, religious freedom carve-outs, to say, look, there are differences within certain limits that you can have and you won't be punished for it. Those carve-outs do not exist in Australia. Australia, as a Western nation, in law, has the worst religious freedom protections in the world. We just don't have anything in this country compared to other Western countries. And that's why when the Marriage Act passed, there were certain people in the Parliament who tried very hard to put some religious freedom amendments to the Marriage Act. They were excellent amendments. They actually were as good as you could possibly really get in many ways. And it was Scott Morrison, then Treasurer, now Prime Minister, who was part of that, and Andrew Hastie and Michael Sukkar and others put amendments up. Now, they of course failed, and they failed because the Ruddock Review was supposed to happen, and then the Ruddock Review did happen, and the Ruddock Review was a massive disappointment, and the Ruddock Review was weak, and it proposed about 1% of the solution, and it hasn't even been looked at since. And everybody has all but forgotten it. Now, meanwhile, we ask ourselves, well, what is the situation with religious freedom in the Australian community? Is it really a problem? Should we really be concerned? Should we really be pursuing this issue? Well, let me run through some of the real-life stories of religious freedom problems in our own backyard. And I think there's several areas of religious freedom. One is freedom of speech. It's freedom to speak the truth without legal ramifications. We only need to look at the saga of the last couple of weeks with Israel Folau to know that that is not always possible. Israel Folau, the question that is asked and answered and will be answered in his case is, can you sack someone for quoting a Bible verse on their private social media account? That once would have seemed like an insane notion that could happen. And yet, here we have a guy who is in that situation. He spoke truth, he published a Bible verse, and he now, for speaking up, is facing legal sanction. Or you could turn to the case of Jason Tay, a photographer from Perth. And Jason Tay had a lesbian couple come to him and ask if he would take their family photos. Now, Jason said that he would take the photos, and in fact, he was happy to take the photos. He didn't believe that it was a conflict of his conscientious beliefs there, but he told the couple that he did have a conflict of belief, and the reason he was telling them was that if they were to feel uncomfortable about his conflict of belief, he would like them the opportunity to make a decision about who they choose as a photographer, but that he himself was very happy to take the job nonetheless. They sued him. He found himself at the State Administrative Tribunal. And the reason for that purely was that he stated his beliefs. That's it. He didn't decline service. He wasn't even intending to decline service. He merely said what he believed. Or we can look at Tasmania if we go to the legislative realm. In Tasmania, we saw the compelled speech laws passed just recently in the upper house. These are laws which for the first time in Australian legal history don't just prevent you from saying something, but force you to say something. It's a real serious threshold we've crossed. You must use the preferred gender pronouns of any person. So if someone says, look, you need to call me not he or she, but Nim or Ner or Zay or Jay or Zem or Nerself or all these ridiculous, there's thousands and thousands of pronouns that a person can choose. And if you do not use those pronouns when you refer to the person, then that infringes their provisions on hate speech. That's incredible. We've come a long way, and that could spread to other areas. This is the state where there was already the law where it said that it was unlawful to offend somebody on a whole range of grounds, and no lawyer knows what that means, to offend. At what point can you offend? It's such a subjective idea. Quoting the Bible would offend some. Archbishop Julian Porteous fell foul of the law. Why? Because he published a booklet on same-sex, on the church's beliefs on marriage. It's a perfectly reasonable and decent booklet, but it offended somebody. Same thing, similar sort of circumstances with Presbyterian pastor Campbell Markham, and that will not be the end of the matter. Or you can look at Kathy Clubb at the High Court of Australia recently with every Attorney General in the country arrayed against her. Why? What was her crime? She was charged with communicating about abortion in a way that can be seen or heard within one of those 150-metre buffer zones. Why was she doing that? Well, she's a sidewalk counsellor for years. She has seen more than 300 babies born alive and their mothers helped through her ministry. She's not allowed to do it anymore. She's not even allowed to communicate in a way that can be seen or heard in the very place where her ministry was effective in the past, in the High Court of this country. Few cases get there with all the Attorney Generals against her. And you ask yourself, well, how's free speech going? Not great. There really are problems for those who care to see. And there really are problems for many people, especially those in professional firms and places like that, where their jobs are at risk and where they cannot speak up. Or we can turn to another part of religious freedom, which is freedom of association. That means freedom for churches, for schools, for charities, for other clubs to basically promote their Christian ethos, to associate around it, if you like, is the best way to put it. How's that going? Well, at the end of last year, we saw that the ALP put up an amendment to the Sex Discrimination Act, and what would that have done? They claimed that the reason they did that was to stop gay students being expelled from faith-based schools. Problem, that wasn't actually happening, and what the law actually was intended to achieve and what it actually would have achieved is it would have made lawsuits possible against any faith-based school that taught the Bible, any faith-based school that upheld their ethos in the way that they run the school and in the rules and conduct that they have and in the policies and codes that they have, and any faith-based school that had traditional beliefs, especially around sexual orientation, gender, family and marriage. That's what would have happened. Christian schooling as we know it would have been in serious trouble if that had passed. And the ALP have promised that they will pursue that if they win government, and they will go further. They will prevent Christian schools and faith-based schools as a whole from being able to employ staff that share their ethos, which means really it's pretty difficult to create a Christian environment where you don't have staff that uphold the ethos of the school. Mind you, they still retain that freedom for their political party to hire staff and to have volunteers that share their ethos, but what's good for the goose is not good for the gander. We've had cases already against faith-based schools, usually transgender activist groups, holding them over a barrel, saying we will take you to court because of your policies if you don't change them. And we've had to get involved and help a few schools in that situation already before such laws have even passed. We have serious issues on the freedom of association front. Freedom from discrimination. What about the Israel Folau thing that I mentioned before? There's a guy who's going to lose his $4 million a year contract, very likely, or at least they're trying, because he quoted a Bible verse on social media. Or the university student that I've often spoken about, a guy called Joshua. What did Joshua do? Well, with the permission of a friend on university campus, with her permission, he prayed for her because she was experiencing anxiety. And then later on, his friends challenged him and asked him what he believes about homosexuality and answered it in a very winsome and excellent way. And because of those two incidences, which one was with permission and the other one was asked of him. He was suspended from university. He had discipline put on his academic certificate, on his academic record, which would have prevented his employment prospects in the future. And he was going to be put in fortnightly counselling to learn how to interact with his peers. Incredible. What about the school teacher that we've helped? You know, a guy who posted on social media about same-sex marriage in his own time and was stood down pending review with the relevant education department, or a medical doctor who went into a school and gave a Christian presentation, particularly around sexuality and gender issues, and actually put the gospel in and spoke the gospel in a Christian school. But that talk was put online and activists saw it. What happened? Well, that medical doctor lost their membership of a professional body over that. And also their relationship with the university was challenged and nearly lost that, but that was able to be saved, fortunately, with some legal help from our law firm. The general manager that was fired from a digital services agency because he was challenged about what he thinks on safe schools and answered the question very reasonably when challenged, and was actually fired from his position. I could go on. We've got stacks of cases in that category. People being fired, people losing jobs, people losing accreditations with professional bodies, and so on and so on and so on. Or freedom for parents. What about that area? Here's the fourth. We've done what? Freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom from discrimination. Number 4, freedom for parents. What about the opportunity for parents to ensure that they raise their children according to their values and not suffer for it? Well, we're currently doing a foster parents case where a family wanted to foster children, mind you, under the age of 6, and they applied to an agency, and the agency took them through the whole process, and they passed everything with flying colours. But in the end, they failed because the agency said, we don't think that you can make a safe home for foster children. And it was off the back of them completing a survey about their Christian beliefs on sexuality and gender. Or we can look at the school programs and we see that parents don't have the opportunity to opt out of those programs anymore. In most states, there's no framework at all for parents to take their kids out of a safe school style class. Or indeed the fact that most of these schools, through the education department policies that are coming through in each state, can now legitimately and legally socially transition at least a child from one gender to another without ever telling the parents. Let me read to you actually from the Victorian education policy on gender diversity. It says this, it says there may be circumstances in which students wish or need to undertake gender transition without the consent of their parents or carers and or without consulting medical practitioners. So it's all in the hands of the school. If no agreement can be reached between the student and the parents regarding the student's gender identity, or if the parents will not consent to the contents of a student support plan, it will be necessary for the school to consider whether the student is a mature minor, etc. There you go. That's one example of a state education department policy as it exists right now. So Harry could actually go to school and be Sally and wear lipstick and a dress and be referred to as such and continue speaking to a school counsellor about his gender dysphoric issues and be directed towards a situation of puberty blockers without his parents ever knowing. It's incredible. This is in a state in Victoria where it is unlawful to get a tattoo if you're under 18, even with your parents' permission. The double standard is incredible. Minors can't buy alcohol, they can't vote, they can't smoke, they can't get a tattoo even with permission. And yet we're supposed to believe that a school can make an independent decision quite apart from a parent's moral beliefs or even just sensible convictions on this stuff. They can make that decision and put them towards a pathway of puberty blockers and then irreversible surgery in which they mutilate their own bodies, and it can't be undone. Freedom for parents, I'd say that that's one of the most concerning phenomena of the last few months. This is becoming a major issue, and every Christian parent really needs to hear this and understand it. Conversion therapy laws probably are the most serious thing coming down the pipeline on this. A conversion therapy law, actually, some of the policies that are drafted say that if parents stand in the way of what a school is doing under those circumstances, they will be, and I quote, labelled psychological abusers and domestic abusers, I quote. Now, there's only one outcome of that, and the one outcome of that is that those parents will lose their children. That's what the activists want. That's where they're pushing, and if you read the conversion therapy policies that are out there, you will see it loud and clear. They're not even hiding anymore. Freedom for parents. Wow. That's a problem. That's a real problem. Finally, freedom of conscience. Are we in a situation where Christians could be actually coerced against their conscience by law? Yes, well, we are. I mean, we already are. People in the wedding business, people in the, wedding counselling business, people in the butcher, baker, candlestick maker type of businesses, we call them, photographers and wedding cake makers and florists and musical groups and all those service providers, particularly ones that are actually involved in the wedding in a significant degree. They don't have any right to conscientious objection at all. They'll be breaking the law if they say, I can't participate in that wedding or this wedding. Meanwhile, photographers, if they don't want to do certain work, that's normally fine. Do we get upset with a photographer saying, I don't take artistic nudes, or we don't do pornographic stuff, or we don't do, or we don't do certain political groups? Of course we don't. But they're forced to do every kind of wedding that comes their way, or indeed the counselling business or the baby showers or the wedding showers and the infinite number of things that accompany the wedding industry, which frankly a lot of Christians are involved in because Christians hold marriage in high regard. Many who've contacted us have had to leave their businesses because they have no other choice. They may face lawsuits. They cannot be coerced against their conscience, and many of us will know about the abortion the abortion referral laws as well in many states, where if a woman comes to a doctor and asks for an abortion and the doctor has a conscientious objection, that's not good enough. The doctor has to refer the woman to another doctor who the doctor knows does not have a conscientious objection. And for many people, that's no better. For many people, that's just being complicit in the process. But the law says they must do it, at least in Victoria and Queensland. Well, how's religious freedom in Australia really, when we look at the facts? I mean, this is the world that I live in. We see this day in, day out. This is going on all over the country. It's getting worse, and people who are ideologically opposed to freedom are really making huge headway. But see, here's the thing. Neither side of the major parties seems to have a plan on this. It's fallen into the background of the election campaign. The Coalition have provided what I'll call some fig leaves, a bit of this and a bit of that. They've promised a Religion Discrimination Act, which covers one of those 5 major areas that I mentioned, and frankly, it could be useless. There's real need for care with the drafting with the Religious Discrimination Act, and I think a careful drafting will be controversial. So will they bother with it? I don't know. I really don't know. But they have said they'll look at that. That's something. Right, it's a few percent of the solution. They've said they'll protect charities that have a traditional marriage belief. Okay, that's a teeny bit in the bucket of the freedom of association thing. It's just for charities, it's just for marriage. They've said that they will do that. They've also said that they'll initiate a review of the exemptions to anti-discrimination laws, and they want to do that through the Australian Law Reform Commission. That'll take ages. Who knows what the outcome will be? If the Ruddock Review is anything to teach us, it'll be pretty bad, or pretty hopeless, a lame duck. So yeah, there's that much from the Coalition. The ALP, however, the Australian Labor Party have consistently and vehemently denied. Every time we've approached anyone, we've never had anything but denial that there is a problem. Never had anything but just a complete blankness, a complete lack of understanding of what's going on, and an unwillingness to engage with the problem and an unwillingness to see the problem. I'm yet to engage with, I think that's true, I mean there might be one or two, but I'm yet to engage with someone from Labor federally who doesn't take that line. The difference, I mean, and they're actually pushing in the wrong direction. They've brought in the School Freedom Bill at the end of last year, which I dealt with, which would have really hurt Christian schools. They're talking about conversion therapy laws, which will just, Christian families will be in massive trouble under conversion therapy laws. And also in Tasmania, they introduced the compelled speech laws from opposition. So there we have overt hostility evidenced in so many ways. And so here's the thing. You'll have either way, you've got a party. The difference will be this. The attitude of the parties to this issue is definitely different. The ALP is more hostile. But in particular, the attitude of the leaders to this issue is drastically different. Remember Scott Morrison actually moved those amendments to the Marriage Act that were very, very good to protect a lot of religious freedom? And he does have some conviction around this. He really does. I know that for a fact. So his attitude to the issue is strong. Whereas Bill Shorten's attitude to the issue is actually, well, he's against it, frankly. Therefore, there's opportunity with the coalition that there isn't with Labor. But what it does mean is that no matter what happens post-election, if the Christian community does not, in an organised and concerted way, stand up and speak with one voice on religious freedom and show the major parties that this is something that's going to affect them in the next term of Parliament, nothing will be done. But it will be a far easier environment in which to get something done if we still have Scott Morrison as Prime Minister. If we have the ALP in government, which remains likely, it will be an uphill battle. But I want to say it's not impossible. We must get active and press back on this, because as I have just described to you with just a very small number of the examples that are out there, this is a serious situation, and we don't want to see conditions continue to drastically worsen. And in order to do that, I ask you to stand with us after the election in the next term of Parliament and raise our voice.